The gunshot that shattered the midnight silence wasn't what woke Hannah Vance. It was the sound of her cabin door being kicked open while rough hands yanked her from her bedroll and threw her into the cold Texas dirt outside. Three men stood silhouetted against the lamplight spilling from her doorway, their faces hidden beneath wide-brimmed hats, and before she could scramble to her feet or reach for the rifle she kept beside her bed, they had already torn down her claim marker and replaced it with their own. "This here's our land now, sweetheart," the tallest one drawled, his voice thick with whiskey and cruelty. "You got no business trying to mine gold when you should be sewing dresses or pouring drinks." Hannah pushed herself up from the ground, her nightgown torn at the shoulder, her bare feet scraped and bleeding. "That claim is registered in my name at the land office. You cannot just take it." The man laughed, and his companions joined in, the sound echoing across the dark canyon where she had spent the last 6 months working her fingers raw to extract enough gold to build a future. "Cannon did. Now get lost before we decide you need more convincing." She wanted to fight, wanted to claw their eyes out and defend what was rightfully hers, but she was one woman against 3 armed men in the middle of nowhere, 5 miles outside Laredo, Texas, in the year 1879. The stars overhead offered no comfort as she watched them enter her cabin, heard them rummaging through her belongings, taking everything she had worked so hard to earn. Her father's old journal, the leather pouch containing 3 months' worth of gold dust. Even the blanket her mother had sewn before dying of fever on the journey west. Hannah ran. She ran barefoot down the rocky path toward town, her lungs burning, her heart pounding with rage and desperation. Blood left dark prints on the pale stones, but she didn't stop until the scattered lights of Laredo appeared in the distance. The town was small, barely more than a main street lined with businesses that served the miners and ranchers of Webb County. But it had a sheriff's office, and surely the law would help her. The sheriff's office was dark when she arrived, pounding on the door hard enough to bruise her knuckles. A light finally flickered on inside, and a heavy-set man with a graying mustache opened the door, squinting at her in confusion. "Please," Hannah gasped, unable to catch her breath. "My claim. 3 men. They threw me out and took everything." Sheriff Morrison looked her up and down, taking in her torn nightgown and bloody feet with an expression that held more annoyance than concern. "You are Hannah Vance, the woman working the canyon claim." "Yes. They came in the middle of the night. They kicked down my door, and you got any proof those papers you filed were legitimate?" he interrupted. "Because I got word just yesterday that there might be some irregularities with certain claims filed by women who maybe did not have proper authority to register land." Hannah stared at him. "What are you talking about? I filed everything correctly. The land office clerk processed my papers himself." "Well, that clerk got fired last week for accepting bribes. Turns out a lot of his paperwork was no good." The sheriff scratched his mustache. "I will look into it come morning, but right now there is nothing I can do. You got somewhere to stay." The casual dismissal in his tone made her stomach turn. "You are not going to do anything. They have stolen my claim, my home, everything I own. Come back in the morning, Miss Vance. We will sort it out proper then." He closed the door in her face. Hannah stood there in the dark street, shaking with cold and shock and fury. The few people still awake at this late hour crossed to the other side of the street when they saw her, as if her misfortune might be contagious. She had no money, no shoes, nowhere to go. The boarding house would not let her in looking like this, and even if they did, she had no way to pay. She stumbled toward the stable at the end of town, thinking she might at least find somewhere warm to sleep until sunrise. Her feet left bloody prints in the dust, and she was crying now, hot tears of rage streaming down her face. 6 months of backbreaking work. 6 months of proving to everyone who said a woman couldn't make it on her own that she was strong enough, smart enough, determined enough. And 3 men had taken it all in a matter of minutes. The stable was dark and smelled of hay and horses. Hannah crept inside, hoping the stable master was asleep, and found an empty stall in the back corner. She collapsed into the straw, pulling loose hay over herself for warmth, and finally let herself sob properly. Every muscle in her body ached. Her hands were scraped raw from falling. But worse than the physical pain was the crushing weight of injustice, the knowledge that the law would not help her because she was a woman, because those men knew they could take whatever they wanted. "You all right, miss?" Hannah jerked upright, her heart hammering. A man stood at the entrance to the stall, holding a lantern that cast warm light across his angular face. He was tall and lean, probably in his mid-20s, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes the color of creek water in summer. He wore dusty riding clothes and a worn leather vest, and his expression held genuine concern. "I am sorry," Hannah said quickly, scrambling to her feet. "I did not mean to trespass. I just needed somewhere to rest." "Easy now," he said softly, the way one might speak to a spooked horse. "You are not trespassing. I am just bedding down here myself." He tilted his head, studying her torn nightgown and bloody feet. "You are hurt. I am fine." "You are not fine. You are bleeding all over the straw." He set the lantern down and moved closer, his movements careful and unthreatening. "I am Henry Whitmore. I work cattle drives mostly, but I am passing through Lerdo on my way to Del Rio. What happened to you?" There was something about his voice, the quiet steadiness of it, that made Hannah's defensive walls crumble. "Men stole my gold claim while I was sleeping. They threw me out and took everything. The sheriff will not help me." Henry's jaw tightened. "Morrison, that does not surprise me. He is on the take from half the claim jumpers in Webb County." He looked down at her feet again. "We need to clean those cuts before they get infected. Wait here." He disappeared before she could protest, returning a few minutes later with a bucket of water, some clean cloth, and a bottle of whiskey. Hannah watched as he knelt beside her, his movements efficient and gentle as he began washing the dirt and blood from her feet. "You do not have to do this," she said quietly. "I know." He glanced up at her, his green eyes meeting hers in the lantern light. "But someone should. This is going to sting." The whiskey burned like fire when he poured it over the cuts, and Hannah bit down hard on her lip to keep from crying out. Henry worked quickly, tearing the cloth into strips and wrapping her feet with practiced ease. "You have done this before," Hannah observed. "Spent enough time patching up cowhands who get themselves kicked or stepped on. Not much different." He finished tying off the bandages and sat back on his heels. "Tell me about your claim. How long have you had it?" 6 months. "I filed the paperwork properly, paid the fees, everything. I have been working it alone since spring." She pulled the hay closer around her shoulders. "My father died on the journey to California during the gold rush back in '49. My mother died a year later from fever. I grew up in an orphanage in St. Louis, working in a textile mill until I saved enough money to come west. That claim was supposed to be my future." Henry was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "And these men who took it, you recognize any of them?" It was too dark. The tall one did most of the talking. "They tore down my marker and put up their own. They will file paperwork come morning if they have not already. Probably paid off the new land office clerk same as the old one." Henry stood and extended his hand to help her up. "You cannot sleep in the straw like this. Come on." He led her to a small tack room in the back of the stable, where someone had set up a makeshift living space with a bedroll and saddlebags. Henry pulled a clean shirt from his bag and handed it to her. "It is not much, but it will be warmer than what you are wearing. I will wait outside while you change." Hannah clutched the shirt, overwhelmed by this stranger's kindness. "Why are you helping me?" Henry paused in the doorway, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the darkness beyond. "Because it is the right thing to do. And because I know what it is like to have everything stolen from you." He stepped outside, pulling the door closed behind him. Hannah quickly changed out of her torn nightgown, pulling on Henry's shirt. It hung to her knees and smelled of leather and sage and something else she could not quite identify but found oddly comforting. When she opened the door, Henry was leaning against the stable wall, staring up at the stars. "Thank you," she said. He turned and gave her a small smile. "You should try to get some sleep. Come morning, we will figure out what to do about your claim." Hannah shook her head. "You said you were passing through. You do not have to involve yourself in my problems." "Maybe I want to." He moved past her into the tack room and grabbed his bedroll. "You take the room, I will sleep in one of the stalls." "Henry, wait." She caught his arm, feeling the solid muscle beneath the fabric of his sleeve. "I cannot repay you for this. I am not asking you to." His eyes held hers for a long moment, and something passed between them, a connection that Hannah could not quite name but felt deep in her chest. "Get some rest, Hannah. Things will look clearer in the morning." He was wrong, though. Morning brought no clarity, only more frustration. Hannah borrowed a pair of 2 large boots from the stable master and walked with Henry to the land office, where a thin man with oiled hair informed them that the canyon claim, previously registered to Hannah Vance, had been found to have irregularities in the paperwork and was now properly registered to Silas Blackwell and his associates. "That is impossible," Hannah said, her voice rising. "I filed those papers myself. There were no irregularities." The clerk gave her a pitying look. "I am afraid the previous clerk was not following proper procedures. All of his filings from the past year are being reviewed. If you wish to dispute this claim, you will need to provide proof of your original filing and pay a review fee of $50. $50. I do not have $50. Those men stole everything I had. Then I am afraid there is nothing I can do for you, miss." Henry stepped forward, his voice dangerously quiet. "How much did Blackwell pay you to say that?" The clerk's face flushed. "I resent the implication, sir. If you do not have business here, I will have to ask you to leave." Outside, in the bright morning sun, Hannah felt the last of her hope crumble. "It is over. They have bought off everyone. The sheriff, the clerk, probably the judge too, if it comes to that." "It is not over," Henry said firmly. "Blackwell might have bought the officials, but he has not filed a proper claim if he is relying on fraud, and he has not spent 6 months working that land like you have. What difference does that make? He has the law on his side. Then we go around the law." Henry glanced down the street toward the saloon where a group of rough-looking men were gathered on the porch. "That is Blackwell's crew. I recognize the type. Claim jumpers work in packs, moving from one strike to another, stealing what others have found." Hannah followed his gaze. The tall man from last night stood among them, laughing at something one of his companions had said. Rage burned hot in her chest. "So what do? We cannot fight them." "Not directly, but I am guessing Blackwell does not actually know how to work a claim. Men like that rely on stealing what is already established. If we can make it harder for them to profit from your work, maybe we can force them out." "How?" Henry was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he looked at her with a slight smile. "You said you spent 6 months working that claim. You know where the good veins are, of course. I have maps, surveys." Hannah's heart sank. "Which they stole along with everything else. But you remember where the gold is, and more importantly, you know where it is not." Henry's smile widened. "What if we convince Blackwell he has stolen a worthless claim?" Understanding dawned on Hannah's face. We sabotage their operation. We make them work for nothing, ruin their equipment, redirect their efforts to barren areas, make them think the whole canyon was played out before they took it. They will move on to easier pickings within a week or two. It was risky, possibly illegal, definitely dangerous. But it was also the only plan that gave Hannah any hope of reclaiming what was rightfully hers. She looked up at Henry, this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere and offered help when no one else would. "Why are you doing this?" she asked again. "You could just ride on to Del Rio and forget you ever met me." Henry's expression grew serious. 3 years ago, I had a ranch in Montana. Nothing big, just a small spread I built with my own hands. My younger brother and I ran cattle, made enough to get by. Then one winter, a wealthy rancher decided he wanted our water rights. He had the law, the money, the men. We fought as long as we could, but in the end he burned us out. My brother died in that fire. Hannah's breath caught. "Henry, I am so sorry. I've been drifting ever since, working cattle drives, taking odd jobs, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots." He looked at her directly. "When I saw you last night, bleeding and desperate and refusing to give up, it reminded me of who I used to be before I let those bastards win. Maybe helping you is helping myself remember what it is like to fight for something that matters." There was pain in his voice, old grief mixed with new determination. Hannah reached out and took his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers as they closed around hers. "Then we fight together," she said. They spent the rest of the day planning. Henry had some money saved from his last cattle drive, enough to buy basic supplies and rent a pair of horses. Hannah drew detailed maps from memory, marking the locations of the richest gold deposits and the areas she knew were barren. They would need to move carefully, watching Blackwell's operation to learn his routines, waiting for opportunities to act. That night, they rode out to the canyon under cover of darkness. Hannah's claim sat in a narrow gorge carved by an ancient stream, accessible only by a winding trail that required careful navigation even in daylight. Henry proved himself an excellent rider, guiding his horse along the treacherous path with confidence while Hannah followed on a smaller mare. They left their horses in a stand of juniper trees and crept closer to the cabin on foot. Lamplight glowed in the windows, and Hannah could hear men's voices inside, rough laughter and the clink of bottles. Her cabin had been transformed into their base, her hard work serving their comfort. "We cannot do anything while they are awake," Henry whispered. "Let us scout the area, see how they have set up their operation." They moved silently through the darkness, Henry's hand warm and steady on Hannah's back as he guided her around obstacles she could barely see. She had spent 6 months in this canyon and knew every rock and crevice, but seeing it through his eyes made her notice new details. The places where shadows provided cover, the blind spots in the terrain, the ways they could move without being seen. Blackwell's men had been busy. They had set up a sluice box near the stream, using Hannah's equipment and her carefully plotted locations to begin extracting gold. Piles of tailings sat along the bank, evidence of their first day's work. They had found one of her productive veins and were already exploiting it. "They are not complete fools," Henry murmured. "They brought someone who knows mining." Hannah studied the operation, her mind working through possibilities. The sluice box is positioned wrong. The water flow is too fast at that angle. They will lose fine gold in the current. "Can you fix it without them noticing?" "I can make it worse." A smile crossed her face. "If I shift those support stones just slightly, the whole thing will wash out the next time we get a heavy rain." "When is that likely?" Hannah glanced up at the sky. "This is late September. We get afternoon storms sometimes. Could be tomorrow, could be a week from now." Then we wait for rain and let nature do our work for us. Henry squeezed her shoulder gently. Come on, we should get back before they come outside. They returned to Laredo just before dawn, exhausted but energized by the beginnings of a plan. Henry had rented a small room above the general store, barely big enough for his bedroll, but he insisted Hannah take it while he continued sleeping in the stable. It is not proper, Hannah protested. People will talk. Let them talk. You need a real roof over your head. Henry handed her the key. I will be at the stable if you need me. Try to get some real rest. But Hannah could not rest. She lay on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind churning with plans and fears and something else she was not quite ready to name. Henry Whitmore was unlike any man she had ever met. He listened when she spoke. He treated her as an equal. And when he looked at her with those green eyes, she felt something spark to life inside her chest, something that had nothing to do with gold or claims or revenge. She had not expected this, had not expected him. The following days fell into a pattern. During the day, Hannah and Henry remained in town, watching Blackwell's men come and go, learning their schedules. At night, they rode to the canyon and made subtle changes to the operation. Hannah adjusted the sluice box angles. Henry weakened the supports on their equipment. They redirected water flow away from productive areas. Small acts of sabotage that would seem like accidents or bad luck rather than deliberate interference. And through it all, Hannah felt herself falling. It happened in quiet moments. Henry teaching her to play cards by lamplight in his rented room, his hands brushing hers as he dealt. The two of them sharing a meal from the Chinese restaurant at the edge of town. Henry making her laugh with stories from his cattle-driving days. The way he always seemed to know when she needed silence and when she needed to talk. One evening, after a successful night of sabotage that left Blackwell's ore cart with a broken axle, they stopped on a ridge overlooking the canyon. The sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that made Hannah's breath catch. It is beautiful, she said softly. Yes, it is. But when she glanced at Henry, he was not looking at the sunrise. He was looking at her. Henry. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. I know we have only known each other a week, he said slowly. I know this is probably not the right time or place. But Hannah, you are the bravest, smartest, most stubborn woman I have ever met, and I cannot stop thinking about you. Hannah's heart was racing. I think about you too. All the time. Henry reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. When this is over, when we get your claim back, I would like to stay, help you work it properly, build something together instead of always running away. I would like that. She leaned into his touch. I would like that very much. He kissed her then, soft and gentle and full of promise. Hannah felt herself melt into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, 6 months of loneliness and fear dissolving in the warmth of his embrace. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Henry rested his forehead against hers. We should get back to town, he murmured, before someone sees us. I do not care if they see us. I do. I will not have anyone questioning your reputation. He pressed another quick kiss to her lips. Come on. Their sabotage was working. By the end of the second week, Blackwell's operation had suffered a series of setbacks that left his men frustrated and angry. The sluice box had indeed washed out during a storm. Their ore cart sat broken and useless. And every area they chose to dig turned up disappointingly little gold. Hannah and Henry watched from a distance as Blackwell himself arrived at the claim. A heavyset man with expensive clothes and a face red with rage. They could hear him shouting at his men, demanding to know why they had not extracted more gold from what was supposed to be a profitable claim. He is getting suspicious, Henry said quietly. We need to be more careful. But careful was not enough. That night, when they approached the claim for another round of sabotage, they found two men standing guard. Blackwell had clearly decided his run of bad luck was more than coincidence. "We cannot get close with guards posted," Hannah whispered from their hiding spot in the rocks. "What do we do now?" Henry was quiet for a long moment, his mind clearly working through options. "We need to force his hand, make him think the claim is completely worthless so he moves on." "How?" "We salt a different area, make him think he was working the wrong location all along." Henry turned to her. "You said there is a barren section in the north end of the canyon." "Yes, but it is all granite. There is no gold there at all." "Exactly. If we can get Blackwell's men to find traces of gold there and nothing where they have been working, he will think they have been wasting their time. He will abandon the whole claim as a loss." Hannah understood what he was suggesting. "We need gold to salt with. Do you have any?" "No, but I know where we can get some." Henry looked troubled. "There is a merchant in town, runs a jewelry shop. He buys raw gold from miners and melts it down. I have done work for him before. If I explain the situation, he might be willing to help." The merchant was a thin, nervous man named Abraham Klein, who listened to their story with growing sympathy. "Blackwell is a cancer on this town," he said quietly. "He has stolen claims from half a dozen miners over the past 2 years. If you can drive him out, it will be worth losing a bit of gold." He provided them with enough gold dust to make a convincing showing, refusing payment despite their protests. "Just promise me you will be careful," he said, pressing the small pouch into Hannah's hands. "Blackwell is dangerous when cornered." That night, they made their move. While Henry created a distraction on the south end of the canyon, drawing the guards away, Hannah crept into the barren northern section and carefully salted a small area with Klein's gold dust. She made it look natural, as if the gold had been there all along, just waiting to be discovered. Then she left subtle signs of her presence, marks that would lead Blackwell's men to investigate the area. The next 3 days were agony. They had to wait and hope that Blackwell's men would take the bait, that they would find the salted area and make the connection Hannah wanted them to make. Every time doubt crept in, every time Hannah worried their plan would fail, Henry was there with steady confidence. "It will work," he told her on the 3rd night, holding her close in his small room. They had become more careful about propriety, but neither could bear to be apart for long. "You are brilliant, Hannah. You know this claim better than anyone. What if it does not work? What if they see through the deception? Then we try something else. We keep fighting until we win." He tipped her chin up so she was looking into his eyes. "I am not giving up on you or your claim." "I promise." Hannah kissed him, pouring all her fear and hope and growing love into the contact. Henry responded with equal intensity, his arms tightening around her waist, pulling her close until there was no space between them. When they finally broke apart, both were trembling. "I love you," Hannah whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. "I know it is too soon. I know we have only known each other a few weeks, but I do." Henry's face broke into a wide smile. "I love you too. I think I started falling the moment I found you crying in the stable straw." "I was not crying. You absolutely were." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the tip of her nose, "and you were beautiful even then. On the 4th day, everything changed." Henry was at the saloon, carefully eavesdropping on Blackwell's men when he heard the conversation they had been waiting for. The guards had found the salted area. They were convinced they had been working the wrong section of the canyon all along. He found Hannah at Klein's shop where she had been helping sort jewelry in exchange for meals. "They took the bait," he said, barely able to contain his excitement. "I heard them talking. They are moving their whole operation to the north end tomorrow. Hannah grabbed his hands. Are you certain? Positive. Blackwell himself is coming out to oversee the relocation. He is convinced he is about to strike it rich. Henry grinned. Once they spend a few days finding nothing but the gold we planted, he will cut his losses and move on to easier targets. And then the claim will be mine again. Hannah felt tears prickling at her eyes. Henry, it is actually going to work. They celebrated quietly that night, sharing a bottle of wine that Klein had given them and making plans for the future. Henry wanted to build a proper cabin on the claim, something sturdy that could withstand winters. Hannah wanted to expand her mining operation, maybe hire a few workers to help once she had enough capital. Together, they dreamed of a life built on honest work and mutual respect and love, but they had underestimated Silas Blackwell's paranoia. The next morning, as Hannah was preparing to ride out to the canyon to watch the relocation, Sheriff Morrison appeared at her door with 2 deputies. Hannah Vance, you are under arrest for theft and sabotage. Hannah stared at him in disbelief. What are you talking about? Silas Blackwell has evidence that you have been sabotaging his mining operation. Equipment damage, stolen gold, trespassing. You are coming with me. That is insane. He stole my claim. But even as she protested, Hannah felt cold dread settling in her stomach. Blackwell was making a preemptive strike, ensuring she could not interfere with his operation by having her locked up. Morrison grabbed her arm roughly. Tell it to the judge. Let us go. Wait. Henry appeared in the doorway, his face pale. You cannot arrest her without proof. I got all the proof I need. Morrison pulled out a leather pouch. This was found in her room. Gold dust stolen from Blackwell's operation. That is not mine, Hannah said desperately. I have never seen that before. Course you have not. Morrison's tone was mocking. That is what they all say. They dragged her to the small jail at the back of the sheriff's office, a cramped cell with iron bars and a single narrow window. Henry followed, arguing furiously, but Morrison just pushed him back and locked the door. The judge will be here in 3 days, Morrison said. Until then, you can think about what happens to claim jumpers in Texas. Hannah sank onto the hard bench that served as a bed, her mind reeling. This was it. Blackwell had outmaneuvered them. Without her free to act, he could work the canyon undisturbed, and by the time she got out of jail, assuming the corrupt judge did not send her to prison, he would have moved on with whatever gold he could extract. The claim would be legally his, and she would have nothing. Henry appeared at the barred window an hour later, his face grim. I am getting you out of here. How? Morrison has the only key, and he is clearly bought and paid for by Blackwell. Then I will break you out. Henry, no. They will arrest you too, and then we will both be locked up. Hannah pressed her face against the bars, needing to be as close to him as possible. There has to be another way. What other way? The law is corrupt. Blackwell has all the power, and you are locked in a cell for crimes you did not commit. His voice was rough with frustration and fear. I cannot just stand by and let this happen. You have to go to the canyon, Hannah said urgently. Watch what they do when they work the salted area. We need evidence that they are the ones committing fraud, not us. If we can prove they are claim jumping, and that the gold they have been selling came from equipment they stole from me, maybe we can turn this around. Henry did not look convinced, but he nodded slowly. I will go. But Hannah, if this does not work, if that judge convicts you, I am breaking you out and we are running. I do not care where we have to go. Let us hope it does not come to that. He reached through the bars and cupped her face in his hands, kissing her fiercely. I love you. I will fix this. I swear. Then he was gone, and Hannah was alone with her fear and the slowly passing hours. Night fell. She dozed fitfully on the hard bench, waking every time she heard footsteps outside, Hoping it was Henry with good news, morning brought Morrison with a plate of beans and stale bread. He shoved it through a slot in the bars without speaking, his expression bored. Hannah forced herself to eat, knowing she needed to keep her strength up, but the food tasted like ash in her mouth. Henry returned late that afternoon, his face dark with anger. Blackwell spent all day working the salted area. His men are ecstatic, thinking they have found the real vein, but I heard him talking to his foreman. He knows something is wrong. The gold is not consistent with the rest of the canyon. He is starting to suspect a setup. Did you get any evidence? I got something better. I talked to Klein, and he knows a reporter from San Antonio who has been investigating claim-jumping operations across Texas. The reporter is willing to come to Lerdo if we can promise him a good story. Henry gripped the bars. If we can expose Blackwell's operation publicly, force the corruption into the light where the territorial authorities have to take notice, we might be able to get you released and your claim restored. It was a long shot, but it was something. Hannah nodded. Do it. Contact the reporter. We need all the help we can get. The reporter, a sharp-eyed man named Thomas Reeves, arrived the next day. He spent hours talking to Klein, to other miners who had been victims of Blackwell's schemes, and to Henry about Hannah's situation. Then he went to the canyon himself, observing Blackwell's operation and taking notes. When he came to interview Hannah through the bars of her cell, his first words were, "This is one hell of a story." "Can you help me?" Hannah asked. "I can print the truth." Whether that helps depends on how much your territorial authorities care about justice versus politics. Reeves tapped his pencil against his notebook. But I will say this. Blackwell has been operating with impunity for years because no one has challenged him publicly. Sunlight is a powerful disinfectant. Once this story runs in the San Antonio Express, he will have a much harder time maintaining his grip on local officials. The article was published the following morning, just hours before the judge arrived to hear Hannah's case. Reeves had worked through the night, writing a scathing expose of claim-jumping operations in South Texas that named Silas Blackwell directly and detailed his pattern of fraud and corruption. He included interviews with victims, documented evidence of bribes paid to officials, and a detailed account of Hannah's situation. The judge, an older man named Horace Sullivan, read the article over breakfast at the boarding house. Then he went to the sheriff's office and demanded to see Hannah. "Miss Vance," he said, standing outside her cell, "I have read some very interesting allegations about your case. Tell me your side of the story." Hannah did, starting with the night Blackwell's men threw her out and continuing through all the events that followed. Judge Sullivan listened without interrupting, his weathered face unreadable. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to Morrison. "Open this cell." "Your Honor, she was caught with stolen gold. She was caught with planted evidence." "Open the cell, or I will hold you in contempt." Morrison reluctantly produced the key, and Hannah stepped out into freedom, hardly daring to believe it was real. Judge Sullivan gestured for her to follow him outside, where Henry was waiting with Thomas Reeves. "Mr. Whitmore has provided me with some very compelling evidence," Sullivan said, "including testimony from Abraham Klein about the gold dust he gave you for legitimate purposes, and sworn statements from other miners about Blackwell's pattern of fraud." He looked at Hannah directly. "I am dismissing all charges against you. Furthermore, I am ordering an investigation into Silas Blackwell's claim on the canyon property. Until that investigation is complete, the claim is to remain vacant." "Thank you," Hannah breathed. "Thank you so much. Do not thank me yet. Blackwell will not go quietly, and my authority only extends so far. You need to be careful." Sullivan tipped his hat to her. But for what it is worth, I am sorry for what has happened to you. No one should have to fight this hard for what is rightfully theirs." He walked away, leaving Hannah standing in the street with Henry and Reeves. Henry immediately pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "You are free," he murmured into her hair. "You are actually free. We did it." Hannah was laughing and crying at the same time. "We actually did it." Reeves cleared his throat. "I hate to interrupt, but you should know Blackwell left town an hour ago, took his men and cleared out of the canyon entirely. Word is he is heading to Arizona to start fresh where my articles cannot follow him. He is gone." Hannah pulled back to look at Reeves. Just like that. Once the story broke, he knew he could not maintain his position here. Too much scrutiny, too many questions. Men like him survive by staying in the shadows. Reeves smiled slightly. "I will keep following his trail, though. Make sure everyone knows what he is." That evening, Hannah and Henry rode back to the canyon together. The sun was setting as they arrived, painting the rocks in shades of gold and crimson. Blackwell's men had left everything behind in their hasty departure: the sluice box, the ore cart, piles of equipment. Hannah's cabin stood with the door hanging open, but it was still standing. "It is a mess," Hannah said, surveying the damage. "It will take weeks to clean up and get everything working again. Then we have weeks of work ahead of us." Henry wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. Together. They spent that night in the cabin, cleaning and repairing by lamplight, talking and laughing and stealing kisses between tasks. By dawn, the place was starting to look like home again. Hannah found her father's journal wedged under the bed where Blackwell's men had tossed it. Her mother's blanket was dirty but intact. The leather pouch that had held her gold dust was empty, but Klein had already promised to help her restart her operation. Over the following weeks, Hannah and Henry worked side by side to restore the claim. Henry proved to be a quick learner when it came to mining, and his strength was invaluable for the heavy labor. They repaired the sluice box properly, cleared the tailings, and began systematically working the areas Hannah knew were most productive. The gold started coming again, slowly at first, then more steadily. Hannah registered everything meticulously, keeping detailed records that no one could dispute, and every evening when the work was done, she and Henry would sit outside the cabin watching the stars come out, planning their future. "I want to marry you," Henry said one night, about 2 months after Blackwell's departure, "properly with a preacher and witnesses and everything." Hannah turned to look at him, her heart swelling with joy. "Are you asking or telling?" "I am asking." He took her hand, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on her palm. "Hannah Vance, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life working beside you, building something real together, being the partner you deserve?" "Yes," she did not hesitate. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married in Lerdo 3 weeks later, in a small ceremony at the church with Abraham Klein and Thomas Reeves as witnesses. Hannah wore a simple blue dress that Klein's wife had helped her sew, and Henry wore new clothes purchased with their first real profits from the mine. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and Henry kissed her, Hannah felt a completeness she had never known before. That night, in their cabin in the canyon, they made love for the first time. Henry was gentle and patient, taking his time to learn what made Hannah gasp and sigh. She explored his body with equal wonder, tracing the scars from his past, the muscles built from hard work, the calluses that matched her own. They moved together slowly, building toward a crescendo that left them both breathless and tangled in each other's arms. "I love you so much," Hannah whispered against his chest. "I did not think I could ever trust anyone this completely. I love you too." Henry pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "You gave me a reason to stop running, to build a life instead of just surviving." The seasons turned. Winter brought cold nights that they spent huddled together for warmth, working the claim when weather permitted and planning expansions for spring. Hannah taught Henry everything she knew about geology and gold formation. Henry taught her tricks he had learned working ranches, ways to read the land and anticipate weather. By spring of 1880, their operation was thriving. They had hired 2 workers, both miners displaced by Blackwell's schemes, and expanded to work multiple sites in the canyon. The claim that had seemed modest when Hannah first staked it was proving far richer than anyone had expected. They built a new cabin, larger and sturdier than the first, with a real bedroom and a kitchen with a proper stove. Hannah hung her mother's blanket on the wall and placed her father's journal on a shelf where she could see it every day. These reminders of her past gave her strength, but her future with Henry was what filled her heart. In late summer, Hannah realized she was pregnant. The morning sickness started first, then the exhaustion, then the undeniable changes in her body. She was terrified to tell Henry, worried he would think she could not keep working, that she was becoming a burden. Instead, when she finally gathered the courage to share the news, Henry swept her into his arms and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying. "Hannah, we are going to be parents. You are not upset. Upset. I am ecstatic." He set her down carefully as if she might break. "This is everything I ever wanted. A home, a family, someone to build a legacy for." Their son was born in March of 1881, during a spring thunderstorm that rattled the cabin walls. The labor was long and difficult, with only a midwife from town to help, but Henry never left Hannah's side. He held her hand, wiped her face with cool cloths, and whispered encouragement until finally, blessedly, the baby arrived with a wail that announced his presence to the world. "He has your eyes," Hannah said weakly, cradling the tiny infant against her chest. "Look at him, Henry. He is perfect. He is." Henry's voice was thick with emotion. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months but never quite settled on one. Now, looking at her son's scrunched face and feeling the weight of him in her arms, Hannah knew. "James, after my father, James Whitmore." Henry tested the name. "I like it." James grew quickly, a healthy baby with his father's green eyes and his mother's stubborn determination. When he was old enough, Henry would carry him around the claim, pointing out landmarks and telling stories. Hannah would watch them together, her heart so full it sometimes hurt. The mine continued to prosper. By 1883, they had expanded enough to employ a dozen workers and were shipping gold regularly to San Antonio. They built a proper office, hired an accountant, established relationships with banks and merchants. What had started as Hannah's desperate attempt to build a future had become a successful business that supported not just their family, but the families of everyone who worked for them. Hannah made sure to treat her workers fairly, paying good wages and ensuring safe conditions. She remembered too well what it was like to be desperate and vulnerable. Several of their employees were women, widows or single mothers who needed work and whom other mine owners would not hire. Hannah gave them opportunities and watched them thrive. Thomas Reeves continued to write articles about their operation, using it as an example of ethical mining practices, in contrast to the exploitation common in the industry. The publicity brought offers from investors wanting to expand the operation, but Hannah and Henry turned them all down. "This is ours," Hannah said firmly. "We built it together and we will keep it that way." Their daughter was born in 1884, a tiny girl with dark hair and lungs that could wake the entire canyon. They named her Rose, and she grew up fearless, following her older brother everywhere and demanding to help with work as soon as she could walk. Life was not always easy. There were lean years when the gold ran thin. There were accidents at the mine that left workers injured and Hannah sick with worry. There were conflicts with other mining operations over water rights and claim boundaries. But through everything, Hannah and Henry faced challenges together, their partnership strengthened by shared struggle and unwavering trust. In 1886, Abraham Klein approached them with a proposal. He wanted to open a proper assay office in Laredo and wondered if they would be interested in partnering with him. The business relationship they had maintained since the early days had grown into real friendship, and Klein's expertise complemented their operation perfectly. They agreed, and the assay office became another piece of their growing enterprise. It provided services to other miners in the region, ensuring fair prices and honest dealing in an industry rife with fraud. Hannah took particular satisfaction in knowing they were helping others avoid the kind of exploitation she had experienced. Their family continued to grow. Another son, Daniel, was born in 1887, then twin girls, Emma and Sarah, in 1889. The cabin they had built proved too small, so they constructed a proper house, a two-story structure with room for everyone and large windows that let in the Texas sun. James grew into a serious young man who loved working the mine alongside his father. Rose proved to have her mother's head for business and spent hours poring over accounts and surveys. Daniel was fascinated by machinery and constantly tinkered with ways to improve their equipment. The twins were still young but already showing distinct personalities, Emma thoughtful and quiet while Sarah was bold and adventurous. Hannah watched her children grow with a mixture of pride and amazement. This was the life she had dreamed of during those desperate nights after Blackwell stole her claim. Not just security or success, but a real home filled with love and laughter and purpose. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1890, Henry surprised her with a gift. He had commissioned a craftsman to create a beautiful wooden sign that read, "Vance Whitmore Mine, EST, 1879. He hung it at the entrance to their property, making official what had always been true: this was their legacy, built together from nothing. "It should be Whitmore Vance," Hannah protested, though tears were streaming down her face. "Your name first." "No." Henry pulled her close. "You were here first. You staked this claim and fought for it when no one else would have. I just had the good fortune to find you when you needed help." "You did not just help me. You saved me. You gave me everything." Hannah looked up at him, this man who had appeared in a stable that terrible night so many years ago. "I love you more now than I did the day we married. I love you more too." Henry kissed her softly. "And I will love you more tomorrow than I do today, and more the day after that. Every day for the rest of our lives." As the years passed, their operation became one of the most successful in South Texas. But success never changed who they were or what they valued. Henry still worked alongside his employees rather than sitting in an office. Hannah still kept meticulous records and insisted on fair treatment for everyone. They donated to schools and churches, helped families who were struggling, and used their influence to push for better mining regulations. Thomas Reeves continued to follow their story, writing occasional updates about the mine and its owners. His articles brought attention not just to their business success, but to their values, and many other mining operations began adopting similar practices. Change came slowly, but it came. Silas Blackwell was eventually arrested in Arizona for claim jumping and fraud. The news reached Hannah through one of Reeves's articles, and she felt nothing but relief that he could no longer harm others the way he had tried to harm her. She did not celebrate his downfall, but she did feel a sense of closure. Sheriff Morrison was removed from office in 1891 after a territorial investigation exposed his corruption. The new sheriff was honest and fair, and Lerdo slowly transformed from a town where might made right into a place where the law actually meant something. Hannah's children grew into remarkable adults. James took over much of the daily mining operations, implementing new techniques and safety measures. Rose married a banker from San Antonio, but continued managing the business side of the mine, splitting her time between both cities. Daniel invented several improvements to mining equipment that were adopted throughout the industry. Emma became a teacher, founding a school for miners' children. Sarah studied geology and made several important discoveries about gold formation that expanded their operation. By 1895, Hannah and Henry had 7 grandchildren and an 8th on the way. They built a large house in Lerdo for family gatherings, though the canyon claim remained their real home. On warm evenings, they would sit on the porch of that first cabin, now used as an office, and watch the sun set over land they had fought so hard to keep. "You ever think about what would have happened if you had not been in that stable?" Hannah asked one evening. "If you had already left for Del Rio all the time," Henry admitted, "I would have missed everything that matters. This life, this family, you." He took her hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of decades of practice. "I think I was meant to be there that night." "Some things are just fate." "I do not believe in fate," Hannah said. "I believe we make our own futures through the choices we make and the people we choose to trust. Then I am grateful you chose to trust me. You made it easy." Hannah leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. "You have always made it easy." As twilight deepened into night, they sat together in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge one by one. The canyon that had been the site of their first meeting, their first battle, their first victory, now held decades of memories. Every rock and ridge reminded Hannah of specific moments where Henry had first kissed her, where they had sabotaged Blackwell's equipment, where he had proposed, where they had told their children about the mine's history. The mine itself continued to produce, though they had slowed operations considerably. There was still gold in the canyon, enough for several more generations if managed properly, but Hannah and Henry were content to let their children handle most of the work now. They had earned their rest. On Hannah's 50th birthday in 1898, the entire family gathered for a celebration. All 5 of their children came, along with spouses and grandchildren. Abraham Klein attended, now retired but still a close friend. Even Thomas Reeves made the journey from San Antonio, bringing his wife and grown children. They held the party at the canyon, setting up tables in the shadow of the Vance Whitmore sign. James gave a speech about his mother's courage and determination. Rose presented a leather-bound book containing copies of all of Reeves's articles about the mine and their family. Daniel unveiled a new piece of equipment he had designed and named after Hannah. Emma and Sarah sang a song they had written about their parents' love story. Hannah wept through most of it, overwhelmed by the love surrounding her. This had seemed impossible that terrible night when men stole everything she had. But she had survived, she had fought, and she had built something extraordinary from the ashes of her loss. "Thank you," she said when it was her turn to speak, her voice trembling with emotion. "All of you. For being here, for being part of this family, for carrying forward the values Henry and I have tried to live by. We started with nothing but a stolen claim and each other. Now look at what we have built together." Henry stood beside her, his arm around her waist, and added, "Your mother taught me that the most valuable thing we can mine is not gold. It is integrity, compassion, and the courage to stand up for what is right even when the entire world says otherwise." I hope you all carry that lesson forward. The party continued late into the night, with music and dancing and storytelling. The grandchildren played in the canyon where their parents had played before them. Abraham Klein told embarrassing stories about Hannah and Henry from the early days. Thomas Reeves interviewed everyone for yet another article. And through it all, Hannah and Henry stole moments together, finding quiet corners to simply be with each other. After nearly 20 years of marriage, they still moved together like two parts of a whole, still finished each other's sentences, still caught each other's eyes across crowded rooms and smiled with private understanding. "Happy birthday," Henry murmured during one such moment, pulling her into a quiet embrace. "Have I told you today how much I love you?" "Only 3 times," Hannah teased. "You are falling behind." "Then I love you, I love you, I love you." He punctuated each declaration with a kiss. "And I will keep saying it every day for the rest of our lives." As the new century approached, Hannah and Henry finally retired completely from active management of the mine. James took over as primary owner, with his siblings as equal partners. The Vance Whitmore mine continued to thrive under their stewardship, maintaining the ethical practices their parents had established. Hannah and Henry moved permanently to their house in Laredo, where they spent their days visiting grandchildren, tending a garden, and simply enjoying the peace they had earned. But they returned to the canyon often, unable to stay away from the place that held so much of their history. On their 25th wedding anniversary, they made the journey together, riding horses along the same trail they had traveled countless times. The canyon looked much the same as it had in 1879, though the mine was larger and more sophisticated. But the rocks were still red gold in the sunset, the stream still sang its constant song, and the stars still emerged with breathtaking clarity. They stayed in the old cabin that night, lying together in the darkness and listening to the familiar sounds. "Do you have any regrets?" Hannah asked softly. "Anything you wish had been different?" Henry was quiet for a long moment. "I regret that my brother did not live to see this, that he never got the chance to find what I found with you." His arms tightened around her. "But no, Hannah. I have no regrets about the life we have built. Every choice led me here to you, and I would make them all again. Even the hard parts, especially the hard parts, they made us who we are." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "And I love who we are." Hannah smiled in the darkness, feeling a contentment so complete it seemed impossible. She had come west alone and desperate, seeking only survival. Instead, she had found love, family, purpose, and a legacy that would outlive them both. As sleep claimed them, wrapped in each other's arms in the cabin where they had spent their wedding night, Hannah's last conscious thought was one of profound gratitude. Not for the gold they had mined or the wealth they had accumulated, but for the chance encounter in a stable that had changed everything. For the cowboy who had helped her fight when no one else would. For the man who had become her partner in every sense of the word. The years continued to pass, bringing new joys and inevitable sorrows. Abraham Klein died peacefully in his sleep in 1902, and Hannah wept at his funeral, remembering the kindness he had shown when she had nothing. Thomas Reeves followed in 1905, leaving behind a legacy of journalism that had exposed corruption and championed justice. Hannah's own health began to decline in her 60s, the decades of hard work taking their toll. But she faced aging with the same determination she had brought to every challenge, refusing to be diminished by pain or limitation. Henry remained by her side through everything, caring for her with the same tenderness he had shown that first night when he cleaned her wounded feet. Their children and grandchildren visited often, bringing news and laughter and the next generation of Vance Whitmores. The family continued to grow, spreading across Texas and beyond, but the canyon mine remained the heart of their story. Hannah died in the spring of 1911 at the age of 63 with Henry holding her hand. Her last words were, "I love you," and she went peacefully, surrounded by family. They buried her in the Lairdo Cemetery under a simple stone that read, "Hannah Vance Whitmore, beloved wife, mother, pioneer." Henry lived another 5 years without her, staying active in his grandchildren's lives and making regular pilgrimages to the canyon. He never remarried, telling anyone who asked that he had been blessed with one great love, and that was enough for any lifetime. When he died in 1916, at the age of 68, they buried him beside Hannah. The entire town attended the funeral, along with miners from across South Texas, whose lives had been touched by the couple's example. James gave the eulogy, speaking of his father's strength, integrity, and unwavering devotion to the woman he loved. The Vance Whitmore mine continued for another 30 years under family management, finally closing in 1946 when the gold ran out. But the legacy of Hannah and Henry lived on through their descendants, through the ethical business practices they had championed, through the stories passed down from generation to generation. The old cabin still stands in the canyon, preserved as a historical landmark. Visitors can see the simple wooden structure where two people built a life from nothing, where love sustained them through impossible odds. The sign Henry made, weathered but still readable, marks the entrance to a canyon that represents more than gold. It represents courage, determination, partnership, and the transformative power of love, because in the end, that was the real treasure Hannah and Henry had mined from that Texas canyon. Not the gold that had been stolen and fought for and finally reclaimed, but the life they built together, the family they created, the love that sustained them through decades of joy and sorrow. That was the legacy that mattered, the fortune that could never be stolen, the claim no one could ever take away.